Hello, and welcome to the Art of Presence podcast, where we feature the stories and inner wisdom of everyday people. It's an unscripted adventure with no planned topic, starting with what is present with us in the moment, and then seeing where it takes us. We practice the art of presence with each other through curiosity, reflective listening, intuition, and asking questions for deeper understanding. I'm your host, Christine Pollard, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Andy. We talk about vulnerability, group work, co-ed healing spaces, and staying present despite multiple technical difficulties. You may find some audio quality changes throughout the episode. I invite you to practice the art of presence with us by noticing what stands out to you from the conversation. What comes up for you, whether bodily sensations, emotions, images, stories. And if you prefer to watch, you can find the full video on YouTube at the Art of Presence podcast. You find us just after completing a meditation to bring us into the present moment. Thank you for being here. Enjoy the episode. All right, so we just finished the meditation, and I'm curious what's present for you right now.
First off, thank you for the beautiful meditation. It was great. I needed it today. Brought me into my body. I've been a lot going on, but I think it's what a beautiful podcast word, but awareness is what came up for me and what's kind of present in me, and being aware of what was going on in here while I was listening and just focusing. And it's been kind of a theme for me for a while as well, but it's beautiful when it gets brought back right to the present and it's kind of put back in your face, especially in something like this. So yeah, just awareness of, I think for me, it's when I can understand what's happening in my body, like being aware that something's changing, something's shifting, and then still feeling safe with that shift and change, because I know that I have that self-control and that self-discipline, and not let that shift drive the bus in a lot of ways, like not let that new feeling or scary feeling come up and make me react in a way or become defensive or triggered or activated. So yeah, and there was some things, and it was just curiosity, right? There were some things that came up in me in that where I was like, oh, like where's that coming from? So
Yeah,
yeah, it was a beautiful experience. Thank you for starting this off with that for me.
yeah, you're welcome. I figured it a helpful way to come into the present and to start with that noticing, that awareness of what is present for me right now, and I hear you gain some awareness of different things that are showing up for you. So
Yeah, very much. So yeah, it was great. And yeah, I've just it's it brings up, I think, one thing that came up in that is kind of coming to me now is, the critic of like, oh, why do people want to talk to you? Why do people want to hear from you? What's so interesting about you? And coming into these spaces, that voice gets a little bit louder sometimes as well. So it's always interesting to hear it want attention, to hear it be like, you're stepping out of your comfort zone in some ways. I'm going to let you know that this is uncomfortable. And if you just don't do it, then you're uncomfortable. So,
right. Yeah.
yeah.
And it is uncomfortable to kind of put yourself out there and in a new way. Like most of the time, and with most podcasts, it's about your work. It's about your expertise. It's about, the parts that you most kind of want people to see or get to know.
Yeah.
And then here it's a little different. So it's like, let's see who you are as a person. And that's, I feel like we need more of that, which is kind of the point of this podcast.
Yeah.
But because I heard that question of the critic, like, who wants to hear from you, or what's special about you? And it's like, yeah, like anyone's story can be beneficial, and your own personal inner wisdom.
Yeah.
There's a space for that. So so thank you for joining me on this. I know it's a little different.
I'm excited. And I love the premise of it, right? Like, I think it's a lens into the humanness of all of us, which we forget about a lot, right?
Right.
Yeah, that we all, and I think pulling that veil back of like everybody kind of deals with different things or the same thing. Like it allows us to connect a lot more too. And it's such a beautiful experience to do that. So yeah, this is great. This is great. Yeah, you're getting me to lean into it right away, Christina. I appreciate
Yeah. And what's that like for you?
it's not as scary as it used to be, right? Like the vulnerability, the showing of self. Back, a little background. I was a paramedic, worked on, did that for a long time, different places, but it wasn't a place that you didn't learn how to be vulnerable in those spots in a lot of ways. So it was always scary, kind of like showing up in that space, and it took getting into like the work, right? Like finding a good men's group and finding like teachers and mentors and stuff to like, and then being received in that space too. So it took the time and it took the having to lean into it to know that you're safe. And I think it's always scary and, you know, to go into these unknown places or to put yourself out there. It's scary, but I mean, fear keeps you from doing a lot of cool stuff too. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's
Yeah.
it's 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 been a learning experience, right? Like and don't get me wrong, I'm gonna be a student at it my whole life, right? Like there was an experience the other day where I was like, I don't want to do that just because it just doesn't feel good, and I'd rather not. And I may have missed out on a great experience, but I think part of that too is like giving yourself grace when you give when you just don't always follow through, I guess. But that's me working on my inner self critic as we go back to what I started off with.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, and that's beautiful. Like, sure, there's an opportunity, see if it's right or not. Maybe not in this moment, maybe not ever.
Right.
But checking in with yourself and then having grace, like maybe you wish you had done something and you didn't, or maybe it was better for you that you didn't. Um, there's like so many stories we can create, but just having kind of that acceptance of like, yeah, this is what I chose and
Right.
this is where I am. And yeah,
Yeah. No, and I think sometimes where I struggle with it is the discernment between fear and intuition. Like what is telling me I shouldn't be doing this and what is saying don't do this. Like what's the difference in that in some spaces? And always very curious. I trust that it's my intuition, but and hope it's not fear. But try to make the right decision, I guess. We're doing the best I can with what I've got, right?
right, right. Well, sometimes it's some of the things that we do need to do are scary, and it can feel like, is this really the right thing? And like you had said earlier, fear can really keep us from a lot of things.
Yeah,
And so that courage or inner safety, whatever it is that you need, or just being okay with making mistakes. Maybe it doesn't work out, but maybe there's still something to learn from it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, like I do some work in relationships, and that's one thing I always talk to people about too. Is like a breakup or like an ending of a relationship or something as painful and hurtful as it is. Like you can find a lot of beautiful lessons in that to move forward from as well. And we have the choice on, do we want to find lessons or do we want to find the darkness or the pain and all that and live in that. I'm gonna feel this quote that I heard, but it was like it's like it takes the same energy to choose happiness or choose positivity over negativity. And so yeah, it's what we choose and how we want to show up in a lot of ways, but it's not that easy as well. I mean, right? It's easy to sit here and be like, just be happy, right?
Right.
But I mean, it goes with all the work that comes around with it. And like that was my big struggle for a long time was like the self worth and the self trust and the self belief. And it's hard to show up in a positive way when you don't even look at yourself in a positive light. And yeah, beat myself
Right.
up a lot in the past because of that. Just had a negative self view and felt very small. And I even
Mm.
do it in my posture, like I walk around hunched over and things like that. And yeah, it's not an easy road to get out of that either. It's, I mean,
No.
it's, yeah, very uncomfortable,
Yeah.
just like everything else.
Right. Yeah. I resonate with that. And um, reminded me of what you shared earlier about like the men's group and, making these choices to be vulnerable or be seen differently or to actually have and receive support. Like those are huge things, and it can be easy to be like, oh, just do this thing, but like it probably took a lot of little steps and choices to get to that point, and the growth through it. And um yeah, it wasn't just a like overnight thing for you, I'm guessing.
No, no, I don't think. I mean, if somebody's figured out how to make it an overnight thing, I want the recipe for that. But I don't think. I mean, I'm sure you can speak to it too. It's not an. It's still an ongoing thing. It's going to be something that's going to be going until the day I don't wake up anymore. Like it's just always going to be at
Right.
that, working on it myself and having to change that story that the ego or whatever it is kicking at me too. So, but yeah, it's definitely it's been a beautiful experience learning how to do that though, because I think for me it's built up like self fortitude in a lot of ways, right? Like when you can it's kind of embarrassing to say, but I've literally stood in front of my mirror and yelled at myself no when I've been having these thoughts, and to like yell at yourself like you kind of build up this resilience in a little bit too. And when I say resilience, it's more towards that inner voice, right? Like it's still always going to be there. It's always going to be kind of squawking in your ear, in my ear. Um, but it builds up the resilience to what I'm hearing. I guess that's the best way I can kind of
Mm.
paint that picture of what it is for me. But yeah, it's it's interesting how the one thing that's supposed to like help us thrive and protect us and all of that is what puts us down. It beats us down. It's like,
Right.
you need it right.
It's so interesting because when my view of the inner critic is that it is a protective
Hmm.
thing, right? And it is trying so hard based on our past experiences of, what happened to us, how we internalize that, the stories we made up about it, and the way we feel we need to be seen or showing up as. And so it's like so meticulous about, and afraid, right? It's really afraid of how we will be perceived, and just how um tricky like it can be to see some of these stories or recognize it as a story and not truth, or like how deep it can really dig into us. And so I heard you saying the yelling at to like really drive home this, countering those voices for yourself. And yeah, it can be so hard.
Yeah, yeah. I think you said it best. Like like it's a lot of inner child work. I feel like in a lot of ways, like really going deep into those pieces of you. And there's for me with that journey, it's been I don't know exactly where it's at sometimes, right? Like there's not a memory or there's not a specific moment. It may have just been like these little things stacking up over time. And so like to go back and try and heal that specific piece is a little bit more difficult. And it's been difficult for me in a lot of ways. I think I had this really beautiful experience with this coach where he walked me through some inner child work, and he had me visualize the color and the shape of what it was and what it looked like. And to me, like that critic was this little, it started off as like this little gray blob, and then it kind of morphed into this child, like in the fetal position crying. Cause it's like, it's that acting out of like, and and I'm so thankful for him for taking me to that spot. But like once I saw it like that, it was a lot easier to understand it in a lot of ways. And it was just a really beautiful experience with it, because it's just this ball of emotion that's just trying to act out in some way, and unfortunately it does it in a lot of unhealthy is. It's never like it never acts out the super healthy way. But yeah, and it goes back to the awareness of like, okay, this is my pattern when I'm feeling this way. Like this is what I normally do, and like my biggest light bulb was when I'm like, oh, I have the choice now. Like I'm aware that this is normally what I do, but I don't have to do that anymore. Where for so long I was just in like this autopilot state of like, well, this is how I react, so this is how it's going to be. Um, and it was,
Right.
and like you said, it's like these little meticulous things of having to go into these little pieces of ourselves to I look at it almost like a Zelda quest or like getting the right puzzle pieces together. Because once you get everything, it kind of, or not everything, but once it starts all coming together, it clicks, right? And then you kind of
Hmm.
see the bigger picture. It's like, for me, I got zoomed back 1,000 yards and was able to take this big look at everything instead of what was just in front of my face. So
Right.
yeah, I think you said it so beautifully there, where it's just this meticulous process, and there's frustrations that come up with it, and there's I don't know how many times I've been like, I'll just go back to the way I used to be. But the problem is once you start knowing, you can't ever go back. It's like,
No, no.
yeah,
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 yeah. And like you said, there's that unconscious piece where you're just kind of acting out autopilot. But then when you become aware, choice becomes available.
hmm,
Sometimes we don't always choose the way we want to choose, but it's at least available. Whereas autopilot is just autopilot and you don't really have choice there.
right.
And I loved what you said about, the little gray blob, and then it morphed into this young child in the fetal position, and how, yeah, when we initially hear these voices, we can see it as one thing, but when we get a little more curious, yeah, we see what's actually underneath it, and having that compassion. And yeah, inner child work has been so powerful for me personally. So um, it's just, and I think because a lot of these things are formed when we're kids and we're growing up, and kids just have such unlimited understanding of the world and how things work, and in order to make sense of things, create these stories, and it's a child's perception, right? But it like stays with us our whole life until we deal with it. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're still believing in a lot of different things. Like, I love how you say that. Like, you ask a 4-year-old child how to draw a car, and it's their perception of a car is very much different than what it is. But like, yeah, you put them in these situations that we may see as normal because we were conditioned to them, but like, these, us as kids have never experienced something, so we have to try and figure out what's happening very quickly. In a lot of ways, and from what our experiences have been at 3, 4, 5, or even 3 months, 6 months, 7 months, it's we just don't have the ability to process that. So it imprints, and that's the thing is it
Right.
sticks with us. And yeah, I don't know how many times I felt like a 42-year-old 7-year-old, like where I'm just like like something's coming up and it just took me right back to 7-year-old Andy. Like
Right.
it felt familiar, and it felt like almost safe in a way, but scary at the same time because I was
Hmm.
still like, yeah, just feeling those same things 40, 50, 35 years later in ways.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's and I think too, the generational stuff as well. Like I did a trauma informed course a little while ago, and the generational trauma really just always blew my mind of how you know hearing like the story of this that a woman that started having panic attacks in the shower, and she went back and started researching her family, and her great grandmother died in the Holocaust. Things like that coming up, so like triggering things like that too, and being aware of that. And I think that kind of like we talked about the humanists is like just being aware that we're all kind of dealing with stuff all the time,
Right.
always, and just having a little bit more compassion for each other and seeing like that human side of like I want to trust everybody's doing the best they can, right? Like, and I want to trust that we're all out there trying as hard as we can. But when it comes down to it, yeah, we're all dealing with stuff, and it's all your stuff or my neighbor's stuff is just as intense as my stuff is to me, to them, no matter what
Hmm.
it is. So
Right.
trying to be aware of that and just the world and seeing people as people for a change instead of seeing people as attacking or trying to do something wrong to hurt us, or hurt me. I'm just trying to figure it out too. We're just all trying to figure it out.
Right. Right. I think that's the kind of con that as kids we think when we're adults, like, it'll all make sense and we'll easily figure things out, and then we all get to adults and we're all still making it up and not sure what's happening and how to do things.
Yeah.
We're all just kind of
Yeah.
helping each other along.
Yeah, but I love now that it's starting to become a norm for like the deeper help to happen with each other, right? Like this ability to, I mean, you as women have been doing it for a long time. Men are just kind of getting into this stuff, right? But it's starting to become more normalized to like have these conversations and put it out on the internet or, have this vulnerability that's going on and showing. I think that's the thing is when we start what you're doing right here is when we start showing each other that we have these things all inside of us, it it makes us all feel a lot closer in some ways, and allows us to relate a lot easier too. So again, thank you for
Mhm.
doing this. I think this is such a brilliant idea.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
yeah,
Yeah, it's I think we all, yeah, need that kind of reflection, that humanity, that, oh, I'm not the only one dealing with this. And a lot of this is universal. I mean, I have guests from all over the world and we're all talking about the same stuff, like
right,
it's it's just the human experience, and I think a lot of people do feel alone in it. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
bringing more attention, awareness, um and spaces for people to connect and share, and yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen it, and like we've shared space in co-ed circles and things like that, and there's been this beautiful, like, with everybody in those circles, like, there's a lot of relating, and there's a lot of like, yeah, I understand that and see that, but I think what's beautiful too is like there's a lot of differences too, and you know,
Mhm.
seeing like, hey, I may be dealing with my partner that's going through something that I can't relate to, but hearing that from another person like may help bring me to that understanding a little bit better as well, and you know, a lot of this work has been done very segregated, like men doing the work with the men, women doing the work with the women. And I think, seeing a lot of this spaces being co-ed or starting to open up to co-ed in a lot of ways, I think it really just gives this beautiful reflection of, because we've been so divided, it's like men
Mhm.
versus women, dogs versus cats. Like
Right.
they're always trying to divide and like make these groups. And it's like, can we just start at people? Like we're all people, like and
Right.
bringing, coming together in these spaces again, as the male and female or whatever the bodies are that come into these spaces, but just seeing, everybody kind of relating and kind of doing this work together. I think that's the shift that I think is really going to start
Yeah,
softening, but creating understanding as well in a lot of ways. And
for
I'm glad,
sure.
I'm just happy to see it. And that's, I was happy to meet you there in those spaces. Like it was a great, it's always a beautiful experience in those things. So yeah, it just the understanding piece is just so big to me, and it's always something I'm very curious about. Is it's you brought up the curiosity earlier and around like triggerings and activations, and you know I'm actually that's the topic we're going to be doing for the circle I host on Sundays is going to be around curiosity versus defensiveness, and especially in
Mm.
feedback and criticism places, and
Mm.
changing that perspective of like, how can I learn from this? Like it just cuts down that activation, I feel like, and so often, we're so quick to, I should say, I've been very quick to become defensive, reactive,
Mm.
especially when somebody's giving me feedback. And and then that gets met with it. It's like it builds off of each other in a lot of ways. But like, I think if we meet with curiosity, I also feel that I was never a good communicator in that space either. I just want to preface that too. And I feel like sometimes the people communicating to me weren't either, because once I kind of turn to curiosity, it opens up the line of communication a lot more. And
Mhm.
it allows me to ask questions for them to better clarify. Because I've noticed when I receive feedback, it's always like, it's blunt, it's direct. It's not always like like the most in depth as well. And so like asking more of those questions, getting that curiosity, it softens that feedback, and it actually turns more into like, like these lessons start presenting themselves a lot easier because we don't have that wall up and we're just like, well, show me, shine a little light on it. And I think, the curiosity changes the game when it comes to interacting, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to friendships. I've been really good or horrible in the past about like taking everything so personally and like taking
Mm.
everything so direct, even in a group
Mm-hmm.
setting, right? Like somebody will say something not directed to me at all, but I'm just like, oh, like why did it? So, oh,
Uh-oh.
did I lose?
I lost you there for a second.
Oh, I got you back. Um,
You said
yeah,
something
but like
about
that,
taking it personally. Yeah.
yeah, like being even in groups, like somebody will say something speaking of their own story, and I'll like, it'll hit me right here. I was like, oh, like why did I feel like like that was said towards me for some reason? Like,
Mm.
so those taking things personally, like it was never about curiousness. It was never about like trying to understand. It was in a lot of places listening to answer or listening to have a defense. So I always felt like I was, that walking on eggshells. It was kind of like I always was on point. I always had to like
Mm.
be. I looked at it as being present because I'm like I got to protect myself and I got to listen to
Mm.
everything. But it wasn't being present in the right way. It was being present from this place of fear and place of defensiveness and yeah.
Hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance, yeah, exactly. Of like, gotta have the shield up all the time because everybody's coming for you,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we all know that's not the case. But again, the stories that we tell, like, that's always been
Right.
my big thing. Is it's funny, like going focus. It always comes back around. It comes back around to the voices we hear, the stories that we tell, and how we're perceiving everything in those spaces.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about curiosity because it's like there has to be a certain level of safety, I think, in order to have curiosity. And so noticing when it is more that defensiveness, like already a sign of, oh, I'm not feeling safe here in some
Hmm.
form, right? At
Hmm.
some level. And um just how all of this stuff is information for us if we can uh notice it or pay attention to it. I think I lost you again.
Back.
There we go. All of a sudden it was just poof gone and I was like,
Oh, interesting.
ah.
Yeah, you had this great look, just like off into the distance. You were just gazing and frozen.
Well, I guess that's better than some like really silly uh like embarrassing.
Yeah, those frozen. My boss loves taking screenshots and sending them off when people freeze on screen. It's great. Yeah.
um anyway, to pick up where we kind of left off and these stories that, we tell ourselves,
Mm,
it's so interesting because it seems like automatically the first story we tell ourselves is the one that hurts us the most. When it could be so many other possibilities, but it's like straight to the heart or the gut, that's just like, oh. And yeah, so when we learn that most things aren't about us at all, pretty much everything's not really about us. It's someone else's own thing that, we can stop to take things quite so personally and see it kind of for what
yeah,
it is instead.
yeah, yeah. I heard this quote. It was, "People's opinion of you would matter as much if you realize how much they don't think about you."
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right, right? Like, why can't it be like you're amazing? Like the first time, like you got this. I think it's because we know how to hurt ourselves. So it's our own brain, and then our partners have the next most direct access to our nervous system and our parents. So it's like
Right.
the people that know our vulnerabilities, that know the closest to it, or the closest to us, know how to stick it to us the most. And who's going to know it the best but our brain, right? Little voice in there. And
Exactly.
I think my question around that is like, what is the we've talked. You said it's to keep us safe, right? But why do we have to associate like that pain and negativity with safety? why does it have to always be that harsh? At least I should say for me, why does it always have to be the harsh critic? I think that's the toughest part about it. Like, I can still take a critic. It doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be Andy
Right.
being mean to myself. And
Right.
because and I always thought, like that was the way I needed to be parented or motivated, right? Like that was the
Mm,
way I was taken care of. Like, oh, the harshness, like you see it in the military, you see it in a lot of different ways of like discipline and structure and all that. And yeah, it's so for a while there, I just kind of leaned into it. I was like, oh, this is actually making me better by doing this, and by listening to this and following it in some ways. And then the more I talk to other people about it, they're like, no, that's not good at all. Like it took a couple years to learn. Like that was not the best way to go about it. But it still can be, like you said, though, like we talked about, it still can be motivation, right? It's just taking that message that you're hearing and like what is. I think you said it best. Is this true or not? Like that's the best question to ask when you first hear those things. It's like ask yourself, like, is this true? And if you got a second, figure out if it's true or not, right? Like sometimes you
hmm
have to go through some of those, and some of the things they say, like there's half truths in a lot of that, right? Like there's
Right.
things that are very true in the story that we're hearing, but the outcome or what we expect to happen is very untrue. And
Right.
in my case, I'm a catastrophizer. I was trained how to do that. As a paramedic, they trained us to like, you think of the worst case scenario possible. That way, when
Mm.
you get there, it's not as bad as what you thought of. So anything happens, my first thought is like, what's the worst case scenario that could possibly happen out of this? And that doesn't work out real well in life. Like that doesn't work. In a profession that deals with horrible things all the time, it's a great thing to have. It's a great tool, but you can't take that into real life, right? Because it's just always going to be, you're never going to live, and that's like we talked about the smallness. Like if we're always
Mm.
worried about the worst case thing happening, we're going to be wrapped up in bubble wrap and stay small and tuck ourselves away in a safe little place. And one of my favorite quotes is ships are safe in a harbor, but that's not what ships are made for.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, there you are. I don't know if it's mine
Okay.
or
Yeah. I
yours.
was like, okay, we're back.
Awesome. Work through those technical difficulties.
Yeah. Um, so while we were, going through that, I was just sitting with what we had been talking about. And it brought me back to when you were talking about the co ed circles. And I think that's so important and kind of necessary right now because you mentioned, all this division. And like I grew up in a very charismatic evangelical church,
Mhm.
whereas from the very beginning, even as kids, there was this separation of boys and girls and men and women. And I just find that so interesting. And so then when I started seeing these co-ed circles, which I also lead co-ed circles, um, they're not like marketed that way, but it's just open to anybody. And usually, for the most part, we don't get men on those circles. We do have a couple regulars, but it is really interesting. There's it, but there is kind of this uncomfortableness at the beginning. But I think to like make space for that and to name that like has helped. What's your experience?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with it, right? It's like just acknowledging that this is might be a little sticky, might be a little uncomfortable for some people to step in. Because I mean, there's traumas around the opposite sexes as well, right? Like in these healing spaces, people are kind of approaching those things as well. So I think it's normal for discomfort to come up in those spaces. And in the normalizing of that, like acknowledging that and like, hey, this is uncomfortable. Like this can be uncomfortable for people and we're here for that, right? And like that's okay. I think both men and women have been villainized by each other for so long, and from the separation, right? Because there hasn't been that like same space sharing in a lot of ways. And when it has been, it's been in relationship, and things don't always go smooth in those places either. And so having these places where it's like you are welcome as you are, like whatever you bring to the table, you're not going to be judged on. Like we're gonna reflect, we're gonna share around our experience around that, but like you're not being judged on this because that's the thing. Like stepping into these spaces is scary. So like when you come in with something, then you're afraid you're going to be judged. You're never going to open up. You're never going to experience what it's like to share amongst a group. And yeah, like setting that tone of like all of you is welcome here. You know, however you show up, like that's a beautiful thing. Because that's what I feel like keeps people away is the well, I haven't done this before, so I'm not going to do it right. And I think that's the
Hmm.
number one message. Is like, there's no right way to do that. It's like,
Right.
you
Right.
know, yeah. I mean, there's different ways to do it, and there's different ways to show up in these spaces, absolutely. But if there's one, like if you're looking to do it right, like get that thought out of your head right away. You know.
Right. What does that even mean, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. But that's kind of the condition we've been in is there's a right and there's a wrong way to do things. We
Mhm.
can't, it's really hard. It was really hard for me to see a different way of doing things for a long time, especially, your background, like growing up in the church. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in a small town in the
Mm.
Midwest, very bubble atmosphere, very similar ways of thinking amongst everybody else. And in that culture, like if you were a little different or you didn't show up the same way as everybody else and stuff, you were a weirdo. You were ostracized in some ways or looked at differently. And so yeah, like kind of coming from that conditioning of there's different ways to do things. And and that's the other, like I think that's and they all can be right. Like I think it's really what works best for you. And as long as you take into consideration you're not hurting anybody else in the way that you go about things, like there's a million different ways to do something right. And
Right.
yeah,
Right.
and
Yeah.
each person's gonna figure that out in their own way. So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. But these spaces, to get back to that, I love that you're doing yours. I guess my question is like, what has it been that the men aren't coming into that space? Like you have the regulars. Like, what has been their feedback on like why they keep coming too? I think that's always interesting to hear.
Hmm. Yeah, the main one is that being able to show up as you are, like
Mm,
in actual authenticity, um I think it's really vulnerable for a man to come into a predominantly woman space and be like, how can I show up here? What is acceptable? What's not? You know, I think there's already perceptions and biases kind of coming in. And so
mm,
it really took, um, I think some repetition, some I think it depends on what they need,
mm,
like needing what they're receiving in the space, having not found that other places, whatever it is that they were needing.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think there was a different feeling in the group when it is just women versus
Mm,
when men are there. But then there was enough recurrence that it didn't matter anymore. And it was nice to kind of get that other perspective that, you know, women don't have.
yeah. Yeah, right, like I think what I heard was spoke to me the most is like after recurrence, right? Like after somebody keeps showing up in that space and it's familiarity. Like I think anything new is scary, especially when somebody different, like a man comes in, it's a man comes into the
Yeah.
woman's space. It's like, oh, like same thing with like I've noticed it with like when I've just led all men's groups and I bring in a woman co-facilitator in some of those spaces, and you see the change in posture, you see you like see everything kind of change, and it's just from the presence of that. But if that co-facilitator has been there a few different times, it's just a lot more relaxation. And
Right.
yeah, like I've always said, the hardest part of doing anything is starting it, is actually just going or doing it for the first time, because that's the scariest part. But yeah, like after a while, after you make it repetition, like for me, when it was, the Thursday night circles, I just log on every Thursday night, like out of repetition. It's like, oh, 6:30. Okay, let's do this. Like, and but to that point, like these spaces need to be more plentiful where it's comfortable for the women in a group for a man to walk in and say, hey, I want to share as well, and do it from a place of like we're all equals in this, right? Like some of I can see though why some of like why there is that safety, because not everybody comes into these spaces healthily. Not everybody comes in to want to
Right.
hold space. It's just to completely take up space all the time as well. So, some of these reactions are also like they are deserving in some ways too
Hmm.
from how we've shown up in the past, and
Right.
in both directions in a lot of ways. There's been this narrative out there of I've seen a lot of content around it, I guess I should say, for like men opening up to women is um, they're saying that it's been like emotions have been weaponized against men in the past,
Mm.
and that really shuts them down. And in the same voice, women, like how many times has a woman opened up to a man and they've been called crazy or something like that? And right, so like there's not that safety there. And I think as these spaces become more normal, that safety is going to be there, where they're going to realize like people showing up in that way is not the norm, and the norm
Right.
is wanting to connect and wanting to be vulnerable. It's just going to take a little time,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
think we're in the perfect spot right now. Like you're seeing that change of like just kind of, I don't know. I feel the energy change kind of in this world of where people are wanting to be okay with each other and not wanting to be against each other anymore. And it's felt like for so long we've just been against each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think um like with my circles, they go really deep, and some for a new person that's never really experienced that before, it can be really uncomfortable.
Mm,
And like naming like, yeah, this is not something you're used to experiencing. And that's okay, and you're allowed to be uncomfortable. And if you have the courage to come back again and be in that uncomfortable, like, know that it's welcome, and it's okay to feel that way, because it is maybe weird to some people. It's okay.
ah, these technologies.
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, but it's a
I can't
little
hear you now.
I'm
Okay.
curious what this is bringing up in you, the tech issues.
It's actually I'm feeling pretty good about all of this, like staying calm and all
Good.
this. Like I just have to laugh at all of it, right? Like it's hilarious because I'm on video meetings all the time for like my job and meeting up with people, and then when we're trying to do something like this and talking about this, like of course that's when all the technology issues are going to happen. Like the meetings I don't want to do, everything's crystal clear and never holds up. Like the internet's always working, right? But when I want to have these conversations, this is when it starts happening. But no, I mean, yeah, there used to be a short fuse there, and I was been like, let's do it another time. I'm done. It's over. And now it's just like
Well,
this
thank
is
you for your
yeah.
patience and continuing
Oh,
to
thank you for
try
your
to make it
patience.
work.
Yeah, no, thank you for your patience. I just think it's a beautiful test, right? Like it's just the universe throwing a tested patient. Like I know there's going to be some bigger test now, in like the next week of like it's really going to get my patience. So you just gotta laugh at it either way. But yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Um, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I was just kind of going back to what you were saying about the groups and getting into those spaces and like coming into that and feeling the authenticity behind that in a lot of ways. Um, it's such a beautiful place to transform. Um, just being in those spaces, I'm sure you've seen it in your circles as well. Like when you start getting these regulars coming in, um, how they open up, how they like kind of unravel in that flower, and then what I think is really beautiful is you start seeing them lead naturally in a lot of ways too, and really showing up for the newer people and making that comfortable for them to come in as well. So it's a beautiful transformation that these spaces hold up, and I love that they're so easily accessible now with having the learning groups and things like that as well too. So yeah, anyways, back to that. I'm sure I had that thought and I wanted to get it out before
Yeah.
lost
No,
it.
for sure. Yeah. And I think with the um recurrence of going to these groups, like it builds a trust. Like it's like, oh, you say this, like all of me is welcome. Is that actually true? And as you keep coming, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. Like I'm noticing I can show up as myself and I can still be accepted and I'm not being judged, so it kind of builds up this trust.
Right. Exactly. And you were saying too, like the deepening that happens in those groups can be very uncomfortable for people as well. Like their first time. I remember like one of the first more intensive men's groups I went to. It was like a 3 day long or 2 day long group. I walk in. The first thing I was intimidated by. I've never done this before because the embodiment is all just different, right? Like you just feel the vibe is different, the energy. And then like within like a matter of 10 minutes, there's a 6'6", 250-pound man on the ground crying in the field position. I was just like, what is like it was like these guys have all been in it. It was my first time in it. I remember driving home that first day. Like I don't know if I should be here or not. Like it was just so
Yeah.
out of my element. And
Right.
but the second day, I felt so much more natural being in those spaces more and more. Yeah, it just becomes the way you move. Like you just feel a lot more open because of those experiences in there. But yes, it does take that. It takes kind of putting that callus on, taking the callus off. Maybe is the best way to
Right.
put that. But yeah, personal experience. It can be very uncomfortable to see something open up and break right away in one of those spaces when that's not your experience in life in a lot of ways.
Right. And to know like it's actually okay. Like
Yeah,
nothing's happening here. No one's like whatever their story is, their background with feelings and what was okay and what wasn't, like okay, there isn't no one's going to yell at you, no one's going to judge you, no one's going to, like it's just a completely new experience. And
just freedom to express, right? just
yeah.
and
Yeah.
to have those big emotions because I'm sure in the women's circles just like the men's circles those big expressions come out and for so long we've been scolded on having big emotions and using our voices and doing those sorts of things so to have the freedom to express in an open way and let that out and yeah it's I know there's been times where I've done that and I've walked out of there feeling like I'm floating because just the weight of all of that stuff that I've carried for years, and just having a man stand in front of me with his arms open, just being able to scream into his face like anger and rage and stuff. Like probably different than in some ways, but those expressions of what they are, like it's amazing what just vocalizing something or just feeling free to show up in that space does and how it releases that in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, we've had people yell, curse, scream, whatever. Like that's what they needed to do. We know it's not at us, right? It's
Right.
not about us, that they're not yelling at us. It's their own anger or whatever coming out. And it's like, wow, that might have been the first time they've ever been able to do that. And so to hold space for that, to witness that, to um, welcome them in that, like that changes a lot. It shifts a lot inside of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably, and for a lot of people in this space, it's the first time they've ever been seen. Like the first time they've ever felt seen or heard, like
Right.
held, or like yeah, it's. We kind of have this idea of just sitting around talking, but like the internal things that happen in those spaces, like the stories that are rewritten in those spaces, the healing that goes on in those spaces is so powerful. And
Right.
and I love what's happening now too. Is there's so many different ways. There's so many different ways it's presented, right? Like if you're in the super new age spirituality, you can find that. If you're not, like if you're more into like data driven science, or they have that as well. I mean, there's one thing manifestations are my frustration because it's just like you think about it, and you make it happen, right? And I can never like wrap my hands around because I grew up in the world of medicine, like science and data. Like I'm a data guy, and I found this program, the TVM program, 2D magnetic program, and how they go around like the data on that and like the actual science behind it and stuff. Like you can find these different modalities out there now that speaks to you in a way that you can comprehend it a lot easier instead of just like finding what's out there and be like, this is going to work, I guess, because it's the only option.
Right.
So it's the opportunities out there to step into these places around a lot of different spaces out there. But yeah, it's just beautiful to see like you have your circle that's just open to everybody, which I love. Like we want to. I know we haven't had so Brothers of the Moon hasn't had their stuff with co-ed, but we're wanting to change that again and get back into that. And yeah, just a lot of cool opportunities to meet like-minded people as well. And I think that's the beautiful part about these spaces as well is you're building community in here as well. I know I have men that live completely across the country from each other that call each other every other day in chat that would have never met if it wasn't for these spaces.
Right. Back. Okay.
If you need help editing this and bring,
Yeah.
uh,
The video part will be tricky. The audio is fine. The video
yeah,
will be a little more.
there's gonna be some
It's okay.
transitions.
Yeah. It's all right. We'll make it
Yeah,
work.
yeah,
It's showing the realness, right? And
there you are.
there. Okay. I know I'm talking and then I'm like, and then I don't hear anything. I'm like, oh, I need to stop talking.
Yeah,
But yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
But yeah, just what I was
but you
saying was the
go ahead.
community piece, like, and how that all has been such an amazing, like offshoot of this, right? Like what's happened from the outside of this, and how people are supporting people outside of these spaces too. So
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned like people finding each other from across the country and yeah, from um other circles I had attended which were all over the world. Like now all my closest friends live in different countries. But we all met at a circle, you know. So it's kind of crazy how that works. But
yeah,
you had said you grew up at a small town in the Midwest. I also did. So that little bubble, like I familiar with what you're talking about. And I think I just thought that like my experience was everyone's experience. But
mm,
when you come to these circles and you hear all these different stories and it just I don't know, it opens up this whole new way of being and thinking and how you see people and so I've just really expanded um in yeah getting out of kind of that bubble and um yeah it just has allowed me to see people so differently and to connect in a different way because there isn't this like everyone has to be the same kind of mentality.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's hard to break out of that when you've spent the most formidable years of your life in that space, in that of like we're all the same. We all think the same and do all the same things, and it's a big world out there with a lot of. It took me traveling to Nepal to really open my mind up about that. It took me going halfway around the world to like find like, yeah, everything I know and believe is completely different, right? Um, and just kind of understand the world in a lot better place. But that's I think, it's a downfall and the beautiful part of like the internet and this technology is it makes the world a lot smaller. It gives us a lot more access to other people, but also it gives us a lot more access to other people. So it's the pros and the cons in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think it once you kind of, it's that awareness. It goes right back to it's just that awareness of like the world's bigger than just what's in my head. That things are different, and I will preach it till the day I die. Like that's the golden key to kind of you know living the life way you want to live it, and not being just in autopilot. It's just once that awareness comes in, it unlocks a lot of stuff for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see you kind of coming back full circle, like how you initially started this conversation.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, with that, what what's maybe something that you're taking with you from this conversation, or that you are sitting with now from this journey that we've been on so
You
far?
know, I think what I'm taking, something that's been sitting with me about this is, with all these little pauses and breaks and interruptions that we've had, this has been a very beautiful conversation. And that
Mm,
it doesn't always have to be a beautiful presentation for the content to be amazing, right? And like to kind of get really deep with somebody. And like I've always kind of been in this thought of like how things have to flow to really kind of get into that space, and that's not the case. Like you can, as long as you're there, as long as you're in the moment and staying with it, like you can get hit with those roadblocks or those distractions and things like that, and still continue on, and still like kind of get wavered, but still continue on down that path. So that's kind of what I'm taking away from this is, even if it's bumpy, it still can be quite enjoyable. It can still can be a lot of fun. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I think to tie it into that awareness, like we were talking about, like just where these things happen, and like we can only control the things that we can control, and the rest of it is just kind of gotta let it happen. So yeah,
yeah.
that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, and when I hear you, like, you know, so again, this is about presence,
Hmm.
and we're even bringing in these pauses, these interruptions, like that's part of what's happening right now,
Right.
right? So it is what is presently happening to us right now
Yep.
as as we do this. So um yeah, we can resist it and fight it and get frustrated, or we can just accept like this is what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, we would prefer it to not be this way, but we can just pick up where we left off and it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, yeah. Everything's gonna be okay. Yeah, but I heard Bill Burr talking about it. He's a comedian. He was talking about this one time. He's like, even if things aren't gonna be okay, isn't it better to just think they're gonna be okay until they're not okay? Like it just makes things. So I like to have that in my head. It's like you just got to keep thinking everything's gonna be okay, and then even when it's not, it's gonna be
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love these just little kind of lessons that come up on their own, and what we can do with it. So
Right.
yeah.
Excellent. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I so appreciate you taking this journey with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite to do this. Like I said, I love the premise of this, and just kind of talking about the stuff that doesn't normally get talked about, the stuff that we don't always put out in front of there. So it's great. I love what you're doing here, and like connecting humans to humans, and very
Thank
honored to
you.
be thought about and brought on the show. So thank you again for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for being here. For more about Andy, he grew up in South Dakota and has lived in Colorado for over 20 years. He balances his time between his work, jujitsu, self-work, leading a men's group, and his best friend, his corgi, Finn. Throughout this conversation, you heard us talk about different groups, and one of the men's groups that he is a part of is Brothers of the Moon. You can find them at www.brothersofthemoon.org, which I will link in the show notes. And my own group called the Sacred Connection Cafe, where we practice listening, presence, and authentic relating. More info can be found at my website. There is a free weekly gathering. No signups required. Just join us whenever you feel the need or are curious to try something like this out. Thank you for joining us for today's episode.